Welcome to Plain Civics. Thank you for joining us. I'm Joe Ulery.
And I'm Bobbi Fisher.
And our goal is to break down how government works so you can make the government work for you. Welcome to episode 20. Bobbi, what are we talking about today?
Peaceful civil discourse plus educated citizens equals recipe for a healthy democracy. Or can we find the better angels of our nature?
We'll get to that in just a second, but it's time for the Fast Five. We'll kick off each episode with the Fast Five. And Bobbi, today you have the questions.
The Fast Five.
Number one, if you were an animal in your next life, what animal would you be and why?
Of course I'm going to say a dog, right? You knew I was going to say a dog.
I figured that.
Dogs, I love them because I hope that my friends think of me this way.
As man's best friend?
Loyal. Okay. When I think of a dog, I think they're so loyal. My dogs bring me happiness.
Right.
And they're beloved.
Okay, number two, if you could get rid of any genre of music, what would it be?
You know, this question rattled me. And I'm like, I don't know what to say because I'm a music lover.
Right.
And I love country. I love bluegrass. I love pop music, rock music, classical. I don't know. Is this a first time ever? I don't have an answer to that question. I'm sorry.
Fair enough. Number three, what's your favorite family tradition?
When I started dating and got married, I moved into what would be a blended family. And one of the things that I loved doing with my kids, and still do it to this day, is making Christmas cookies. It takes the whole day because we do everything by the book. There's no rushing and not quite as chaotic as Lucy and Ethel at the chocolate factory. But we still have fun.
One of my favorite episodes.
And play around, but definitely cut out Christmas cookies with buttercream icing.
I wondered if you might say that.
Yes, and I'm going to make some, and we're going to eat them together.
Soon, I hope.
Yes, yes.
Okay, number four. What's the one place you've always dreamed of going?
Alaska is it, and we're going next year.
Really?
Yes.
Cruise?
Cruise. I've been asking everybody that's gone for advice on what we want to do and what we don't want to do, but I have not heard a single person come back and have a regret from going to Alaska.
Too bad my mom's not still alive because she and my dad took an Alaska cruise several years ago.
And loved it?
They did.
I want to see that part of America because I don't know it.
All right, number five. What was your least favorite food as a kid?
Is it okay if I say as a collective group, vegetables? Anything green?
Sure.
It's vegetables. I hated vegetables. And, you know, I look back, you know, it's so funny how what we do as a child really bakes into who we become as an adult. And we never ate seafood either. And I still don't eat it to this day. So
I'm not sure it was as easily available that way back then. We used to get it like we'd go out to eat like every Friday night, sometimes specifically to a place that offered that. So I'm wondering, you know, it just probably wasn't as easy to get.
And we didn't leave Logansport much, and I can't think of a seafood restaurant that was here in town.
Right.
So there you go. That's the Fast Five. Let's jump into this episode, and we're sort of picking up where we left off in episode 19. This is episode 20. We're starting off with the common thread of our better angels of our nature. Bobbi, let's get to work.
And now our feature presentation.
So what better way to begin our discussion today than with this quote from Abraham Lincoln's first inaugural address that I ended the last episode with, because I do think it is very relevant right now. Quote, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." End of quote.
That quote, I told you this today. When I read it, when I heard it, it makes me get goosebumps. And those words are as true, if not truer, today than when spoken.
Absolutely. This is a natural follow-up to our discussion about polarization in America, which we did in episode 19. This one is about civil discourse in America and how we can heal our democratic republic again and return to the healthy democracy the framers created and hoped would last. Got to thinking a little bit about this last night as I was preparing and going through. Many experts say there are signs that our healthy democracy is slipping away, and it's slipping more and more toward authoritarianism. You can believe what you want. Like we've said many times, we're just trying to present information and you can take it or leave it. But I follow historian Timothy Snyder, and he said we're not there yet, as in we're not to authoritarianism just yet.
Mm-hmm.
But he sees more and more the characteristics leading to that are changing at a rapid pace. And he's an expert on this. You can look him up and see, what some of his areas of study and some of the books that he's written and so forth. But one of his books is called On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. And it's about how to prevent a democracy from becoming a tyranny. And tyranny is just another word for basically having an authoritarian government. I looked up the actual definition, a nation under a cruel and oppressive government, ruled by one who has absolute power without the legal right, cruel and unreasonable or arbitrary use of power or control. So again, you can think what you want, but I would argue with anyone that tries to say we aren't seeing some of those things happening in America.
And that book it looks like it's a quick read.
It is. It's only 126 pages. It's a small book, and it's very simplified. I mean, even if you're not a historian or college educated or whatever, it's easy to read and understand. And again, it's just something to think about, to spur your thoughts as you listen, especially after you've listened to this episode, about should we be worried and how can we improve our civil discourse and try to kind of shift the pattern that he sees and get us kind of back in the right lane of having a healthy democracy.
And I would encourage anybody that's listening to this podcast today or the news on any channel, we welcome you to hear what we say and then take that information and form your opinions after you've investigated.
Right.
Don't take our word ever as anything final. The more we use our brains, I think the more efficiently they run, kind of like the more you service an engine. So please, anything we say here, look it up.
Right.
And
it's a tool.
It is a tool.
We're trying to give you information and tools.
That's a good way to put it.
You can use.
Yeah.
So the famous Lincoln quote that I used at the end of episode 19 and that I just reread at the beginning of this episode is from his first inaugural address, which he gave on March the 4th, 1861, which was just a little over a month from the first shots of the American Civil War, which happened in April of 1861. By March of 1861, 7 southern states had already seceded from the United States and formed the Confederate States of America. The speech was actually written, back when presidents wrote their own speeches often, was actually written by Lincoln, and he wrote it in the spirit of a peaceful reconciliation with the southern states, and he was largely speaking in this address to the southern states. Lincoln was hoping that he could prevent the impending war that would possibly pit brother against brother. Lincoln laid out his plan for dealing with slavery, pledging to not interfere with it where it already existed. He also stressed that secession went against the Constitution and that if arms were taken up by the South against the United States, that would be seen as open rebellion and met with force. And you can look up his first inaugural and read the whole thing, but I just kind of summarized it for you there. In a time of national crisis and extreme polarization, Lincoln ends with the famous quote I started this episode with, by appealing to the common humanity and the shared history that he hoped could overcome animosity and unite the nation. Unfortunately, it did not, but the Civil War was not the end to that common humanity and shared history. The United States, or the Union, defeated the Confederacy, and we were able, slowly, however, to work out the differences that had divided us. Has it always been smooth sailing? Absolutely not. But we have always been able to come out of times of crisis and revive the better angels of our nature.
Look at 9/11.
Exactly.
We came together immediately, and we didn't even blink.
I'm going to give some other examples further in this, too, that you can think about. What do I mean by civil discourse? Those are kind of fancy words. Discourse is a fancy word for discussion or conversation. Civil refers to discussing public issues or concerns among individuals or groups with different viewpoints while maintaining mutual respect, sincerely listening to the other person person or people with an open mind and being willing to change your opinion and to speak honestly. The rules for civil discourse emphasize respect for others, active listening, and focusing on the ideas, not the people.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of talked about this a little bit in the last episode, things that we need to try to start doing better, a better job with. Participants should use a civil tone, speak honestly, ask clarifying questions, and differentiate between fact and opinion. The goal is to foster a constructive environment where diverse or different perspectives or opinions can be shared and understood, ultimately leading to a common ground or compromise and hopefully a path forward.
Sometimes just listening to somebody will allow them to see you in a different light, and that will encourage dialogue.
Right, and I think you mentioned in the last episode, we need to consider what other people said, and it's all right to admit that you're wrong about something or to change your mind. That's the way it should be.
Yes.
You hear facts or information that make sense, or that you look them up and find, oh, well, that's right.
We learn new information every day, and we should be open to hearing that information. And I hope information is what you use to create your opinions.
Right. So why do we need civil discourse? Civil discourse is the way for we the people and our elected leaders to solve public issues, to build mutual understanding, explore solutions, and foster community, even when disagreements exist. Think common good. Civil discourse should not be a contest. The goal is to promote mutual understanding with the purpose and hope of working out solutions for the common good. Civil discourse is the practice of deliberating, which means to carefully weigh and consider matters of public concern with others in a way that seeks to expand knowledge and promote understanding. It's kind of like what we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And Thomas Jefferson once said, and this is a quote from him, "I never saw an instance of one or two disputants convincing the other by argument." End of quote. Civil discourse isn't a new idea. In fact, it dates back to ancient Greece and Rome. And I could have gone into a long explanation of like Socrates and all those Plato and all those people. Basically, it's where reasoned debate was crucial for effective governance and citizenship. And they understood that centuries ago. The creation of the U.S. Constitution involved extensive debates and compromises, as we discussed in our earlier episodes about the Constitutional Convention. How the framers created the Constitution over the course of 3 months in the hot summer of 1787 shows how different viewpoints could lead to progress through dialogue. The United States has seen its ups and downs regarding civil discourse during its almost 250 years of history. As a nation that has been very diverse from the start, with a mix of cultural heritages, languages, and beliefs, we've always been able to resolve our issues through civil discourse. As I mentioned a minute ago, the early years saw the 55 men, often referred to as the framers or founders, being able to shut themselves into a stiflingly hot building during the summer of 1787 and carry out numerous discussions and debates that resulted in the U.S. Constitution that we still live and are governed by today. And I made myself a little asterisk out here. If you haven't listened to those or haven't looked at our Facebook, I even put links on there to show the extensive listing of all of the different discussions and debates day by day that they went through to come to the consensus that created our Constitution. Did they have conflicts and disagreements? Of course they did. And you can look at that list and see that that's the case. Civil discourse doesn't mean that conflict and disagreement doesn't exist, but it's not supposed to reach the point of violence. Instead, it's resolved with respect, constructive dialogue, and compromise. And that's exactly what the framers did. It's about how the disagreements are worked out. There's peace and civility, not violence and name-calling. If civil discourse breaks down, it is possible that violence may come about. Probably the most famous example of disagreements in Congress that led to violence occurred in the period right before the Civil War, when the nation was extremely polarized over the issue of slavery and states' rights. It was May 22nd, 1856, and Senator Charles Sumner, who was an abolitionist Republican from Massachusetts, abolitionist referring to people who were against or wanted to end slavery. He had just given a fiery abolitionist speech on the Senate floor. The Senate had just adjourned when Representative Preston Brooks, who was a pro-slavery Democrat from South Carolina, entered the Senate chamber carrying a cane. Brooks was angry about the speech that Sumner had just given. He walked over to Sumner and whacked him in the head with the cane and proceeded to beat the anti-slavery Northerner unconscious. Afterwards, Brooks walked out of the chamber without anyone stopping him. They didn't have large amounts of security and all that like we do today.
But it's appalling no one stopped him.
Right. The beating nearly killed Sumner, and he was actually physically unable to return to the Senate for almost 3 years after that event. He did eventually return, though. But this event contributed significantly to the country's polarization over the issue of slavery because it was a highly publicized event. Even though they didn't have TV and radio, there were lots of newspapers and other types of publications, and especially in the large cities and around Washington, D.C., this was covered very publicly and, of course, with political cartoons as well. It is considered symbolic of the breakdown of reasoned discourse prior to the Civil War. Now, this is probably the most famous violent attack in Congress, but it is far from the only one. In the 3 decades leading up to the Civil War, there were actually more than 70 violent incidents between congressmen, either in the Capitol or outside on the streets or whatever. It was a time of heightened tensions, especially over the issue of slavery. The Brooks attack on Sumner was highly publicized, as I said, and even today it's also usually included in school history textbooks. I know when I was still teaching 8th grade history, it was in every textbook I remember ever using was the incident between Sumner and Brooks. Since the Civil War, there are accounts of political tension in Congress, but violence between members of Congress has been much less frequent since the Civil War, thank goodness. The Civil War itself and the resolution of the slavery issue dramatically changed the political landscape and reduced the political polarization that led to such intense pre-war violence. In addition, members of Congress today may not carry weapons or firearms in either the House or Senate chambers. They can have them, but they cannot take them in the chamber. Now, we have seen other difficult times in our nation's history when polarization over current issues have challenged civil discourse. The period of the 1950s and 60s saw the civil rights era, with unrest and disagreement over not only civil rights issues, but also the highly unpopular and controversial Vietnam War. Such highly divisive issues also created difficulties with civil discourse. There have also been periods of suppression of civil discourse that have ended in failure, not as much in the United States, but we'll get to one of those in just a minute. But if you think of authoritarian regimes like Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, even Russia today, and Maoist China, but also even in the United States during the period of the 1950s, during what's known as McCarthyism, which saw a lack of open debate on controversial topics such as communism, which stifled free discussion and inquiry. Senator Joseph McCarthy, this period is known as the Red Scare, accusing people of being communists. A lot of, like, for example, Hollywood celebrities, and not just them, but were blacklisted because they were accused of being communists or communist sympathizers. I know one of my favorites, Lucille Ball, was one of the people that they tried to blacklist. And of course, it was proven later that she was not communist. But, he worked up a lot of people over this. And, it was a time of very tense congressional hearings and accusations and people possibly losing their livelihoods because of this Red Scare. And we see with the current administration in Washington has also recently threatened to stifle some what they call hate speech in response to the shooting of Charlie Kirk. Since I did the notes for this, of course, we had the incident with Jimmy Kimmel being taken off the air out of ABC last week. Anyway, as of the preparation for this episode, both Republicans and Democrats have spoken out and publicly reminded the current U.S. Attorney General about Supreme Court cases regarding hate speech, because she made a blanket statement about this administration was going to remove people who were doing this kind of speech. So one of the most famous cases is the 1969 case known as Brandenburg versus Ohio. And this is considered kind of the main Supreme Court case on speech and freedom of speech. The court established that speech can only be prohibited if it is directed at inciting or producing, quote, imminent lawless action, end quote, and is, quote, likely to incite or produce such action, end quote. So I'll just kind of leave that there and let you think about, if you heard or saw what Jimmy Kimmel said, for example, or he's not the only example recently that what prompted our Attorney General to make those statements. So think about, what is the person actually saying, and are they causing some kind of lawless incident or action? As times and technology have changed, and, think about the reasons we discussed regarding polarization and the media, for example, in our last episode. Yeah. As times and technology have changed, the means of making civil discourse even more difficult than in the past have also changed. And I would argue that today's difficulties with civil discourse are much more challenging for us to deal with than in the past.
Agreed.
Historically, the range of voices in civil discourse was limited by print media. For example, if we look back at the Sumner Brooks incident, the only media that existed at the time was print media. Yeah. They couldn't get on the TV and 24/7, or they couldn't pull out their phones and get on Facebook or wherever. They had print media, and it was limited in the number of publications and how often it was printed or whatever. So it was more that kind of put a control more on the discourse that was out there because it was more limited. But with the advent of our 24/7 cable news and the internet, the landscape has dramatically changed since then. Social media inflames the dialogue of people with different points of view. In addition to the 24/7 news cycle that includes traditional and legacy news and the often highly partisan network news, the use of blogs, podcasts, and social media platforms like Facebook, X, or formerly Twitter, TikTok, etc., these same platforms also often provide for the rapid spread of uncivil content, personal attacks, and misinformation, complicating efforts to maintain productive dialogue. So we don't just have a little newspaper that's going out once or, daily or, once a week. We have this bombarding us 24/7.
That's a great word for it, because our Facebook page or our social media page, pick platform, is like a little mini newspaper.
Right.
And there are millions of us, and we do more than one publication a day sometimes. I do several posts, and so you can see it's a feeding frenzy, and the facts aren't always checked.
I didn't even make a note of this, but I just saw it or read it last night about, and it might have even been a member of Congress that said this, that maybe it's time to look at putting some restrictions on social media as far as their freedom of speech, just like, if they're allowing stuff that is causing this.
It should be flagged. So, at least be flagged.
I mean, not sure how they would do it.
No.
I think that's probably the holdup of having something like that, but
it's a discussion maybe that should be looked at.
Exactly. So anyway, with this spread, rapid spread of uncivil content and so forth, this often leads to people consuming information only from sources that reinforce their existing views, which creates polarization, creates an echo chamber that hinders mutual misunderstanding, kind of like the us and versus them that we talked about last episode. People become very tribal over politics and common public issues. All of this can cause citizens to lose faith and distrust our institutions. For example, Congress, one of the cries the last few years has been, deep state. Well, is there a deep state really? I mean, again, I'll leave that for, each person to decide, but that's one of the things that gets thrown around a lot that helps spur that idea or the feeling of distrust in our government, for example. It also creates distrust between one another, increases tension, there's more outrage and possible violence, as we've seen recently. Violent acts and or extreme discourse on social media platforms have been getting more prevalent in recent years because it's easier for some people to do that than to engage, like you were saying before, in civil discourse with individuals holding vastly different viewpoints, because trying to engage civilly requires significant patience, mental effort, and emotional labor, which can be exhausting and frustrating.
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes to hold back what you really want to say.
We're all emotional.
Right. But that's what we really need to be doing, is listening and being respectful. And it's also a lot easier to hide behind one's phone or keyboard in the privacy of one's own home than to actually sit on the driveway, like you were talking about, in person, face to face, and talk with people.
Yeah, you certainly edit yourself in the real face-to-face conversations, which why we can't do that on our keyboards beyond me. But we're so worried about AI. I think a lot of people I think it's fair to say we're worried about AI, but what I argue, what we don't realize is the algorithms that are used behind the things that appear in our feed is sort of training or brainwashing us into thinking like robots on certain issues.
Right.
That's my opinion, but I would argue.
Well, and I'm going to throw out here too, I think I've mentioned it in some earlier episodes, the more somebody repeats something or the more you keep hearing it again and again, whether it's true or not, or factual or not, the more you hear it, the more you're going to start believing it.
What's the Pavlov's dog, like the theory?
Ring the bell.
Ring the bell, and the dog, give them a treat, reward them. And yeah,
right.
We have to watch out for that. That's easy to fall into.
Right. So what can we do to fix this problem and improve civil discourse? In 2023, 13 of our U.S. presidential foundations and centers, for the first time ever, issued a joint bipartisan statement it was called Strengthening Our Democracy. I will put the link on our Facebook page. It urged all Americans to, quote, engage in civil dialogue. And they noted that, and this is still a quote, when united by our founding ideals, Americans should reaffirm the importance of democratic values, civic responsibility, civility, and a pluralistic society. So again, by pluralistic, we're meaning we have lots of different heritages and languages and religions. We're not just one type of person. That's kind of what makes us the melting pot that we are. That was the end of their quote. But they all were calling for compassion, tolerance, pluralism.
Yes.
Again, realizing we have these various different societal groups that make up our country. And they further declared that, and this is some more quote, civility and respect in political discourse, whether in an election year or otherwise, are essential. End of quote.
And it's always an election year.
Yeah, right. So calls from groups like this can call out to the citizens in general. So that's one thing, if we could get people to read things like this. But also schools play a part in teaching and encouraging tolerance and civic values. In 2021, Educating for American Democracy and Roadmap to Educating for American Democracy described what they call the civic values and virtues needed to overcome polarization and loss of confidence in political institutions. These values include reflective patriotism, civic honesty, civic duty, toleration, respect, dignity, civil disagreement, civic friendship, courage, and justice. Schools should be teaching these values as well as current issues which sometimes concern sensitive subjects. Today, the last part of that equation has become more difficult for many K-12 teachers and even some college professors, as there has been more and more pushback from special interest groups about what schools should be teaching. In order to lessen schools' exposure to legal issues and outside pressure, many states or localities have placed restrictions on what teachers can teach about. I just saw yesterday a lady whose name is Randy Weingarten. She actually is the head of the American Federation of Teachers. She was being interviewed on a show. She has just published a book that is entitled Why Fascists fear teachers. And she was discussing some of it, which I found interesting, that she points out that attacks on schools and teachers have long been a hallmark of fascist regimes. Throughout history, as many dictators rose to power, they began banning books and controlling curriculum. Fascists fear teachers because teachers foster an educated and empowered population that can see past the propaganda and scare tactics. Fascists fear teachers because they teach young people how to think for themselves. And that's just a little blurb, but I thought, that's something people really need to think about.
Spot on.
It's like, think about, how much we hear about like these book bans, and school libraries can't have these books, and teachers can't teach this and that.
Is there a pattern that we can spot today that happened in years past, and what can we do to fix it?
So that was just a little side note on what schools should be doing and could be doing, but maybe are being pressured to not do as much of. Also, we can look at psychology. Psychology has taught us that the ability to engage in ethical and moral reasoning develops gradually during the school years and can and should be cultivated by educators. Psychologists have also identified social emotional skills of human interactions and shown they can be developed from an early age. Many of these skills can be taught through social studies classes or other types of classes like health or psychology or sociology classes in high school, for example. But some of these ideas should just be started at early ages, just how to get along with people. I mean, if I think of elementary school.
Basic, but yes.
It's like how to get along, and then you build on that and teach kids how to talk to each other and
work out differences.
Work out problems. Right. And when I think of social studies, I know often in early grades, students do learn about patriotism and social skills of getting along with others. And then as students proceed through higher grades in school, more of the skills that I mentioned above are added and reinforced. And leaders in developing civil discourse materials identified these 5 value sets as critical to civil discourse. Number 1, caring, compassion, and kindness. Number 2, honest, perspective, talking. 3, humility. 4, integrity. And 5, mutual respect. As students progress through their school years, they should be learning how to engage in dialogue and debate civilly. So they should be learning all of these skills as they go through. Now, so that takes care of what children and young adults should be learning. But what about adults that are, they're not in school anymore, and maybe they didn't have those values cultivated or learn how to do them, or they've kind of gotten off course, we'll just say. So how can they learn to participate in civil discourse? There are several recent studies available with ideas. I found this one to be the most straightforward, and they all had a lot of similarities, so I thought this one kind of combined all of this into the most straightforward answer, and it's called the Better Arguments Project. It was actually a national initiative committed to the civil discourse necessary to overcome social divides, and it shares 5 principles of a better argument. So if you're an adult, you can think about these things. Number 1, and we've talked about this, take winning off the table. Be open to exchanging ideas and understanding a different perspective rather than focusing on winning an argument. Remember, we've said it's not a win or lose. It's supposed to be for all of us. What's the best for all of us? Number 2, prioritize relationships and listen passionately. Listen to understand others' points of view rather than waiting for an opportunity to butt in and advance your argument. Build a relationship beyond one's opinion and be willing to share things about yourself in return.
And I'd say this is for every topic, not even just politics.
You could say even if you're married, in a relationship,
have an argument.
Give and take. Right. Number 3, pay attention to context. Understand that factors such as life experience, culture, and access to information influence one's beliefs, and allow those factors to inform your perspective of their point of view. And that makes me think of, like, I've heard white people, for example, trying to say, like with Black Lives Matter or one of those things. Have you lived their life? Do you know what they've gone through?
What's the old saying, till you've walked a mile in someone's shoe?
Right. Or any group that, is not the same as like I'm white, so obviously I've not walked in their shoes. Whatever the case may be, they have their perspective and they've lived it. And you need to listen to it and, believe what they're telling you, that they experienced such things.
I'm a storyteller in life, and my takeaway is context is everything.
Right. Number 4, embrace vulnerability. Be willing to grow by considering an alternative perspective. So there's that give and take, or you learn something new and it changes your mind. Be vulnerable. 5, make room to transform. Remove the focus from winning an argument and be open to different perspectives.
I think this is a quick cheat sheet of if you really mean in your heart that you want this nation to heal and you want to bring the country back together, here are 5 different things that you can do starting today.
Right.
To make a change.
Not too late.
No.
And I will even be willing to put these up on our Facebook page as well.
I think this is a great sheet.
Yeah. Widespread issues with hate speech across social media platforms has encouraged researchers to find ways to encourage civil discourse and create a better online environment for all users. That list of things we just talked about is just kind of an in general having a discussion, but here's to think about online audiences. To reach a broader audience, the University of Arizona created the National Institute for Civil Discourse, or the NICD, back in 2011. The NICD is a nonpartisan organization that believes in the power of civil discourse to transcend party divisions. Their key principles include constructively engaging differences, listening for understanding, empathy, humility, conscience, principled advocacy, and common ground. So those may sound familiar because all of this, whether it's students in school or adults engaging or online, are all enveloping those same qualities.
Yeah, and Bobbi, I would just say I want to ask an open-ended question of who wins when we're divided. It's not us.
No.
The way social media platforms are set up, the way certain opinion shows on TV are set up is to divide us. We lose, they win from the allegiance and mistrust that is sown. So we have to remember, get along.
And I think we talked about, and it was maybe the last episode, but we're not really as divided. If you look at some of those statistics I gave in the last episode, we're not as divided as, if you listen to some of these, especially the very partisan networks, for example, or readings or whatever, that try to make it sound like we have these huge, vast differences. The polling doesn't show that.
No. Get outside. Meet your neighbors. We sit out in our driveway at night and talk. And trust me, we don't all believe the same thing,
right,
but we have a fun time and can get along and enjoy ourselves in the evening out in the driveway face to face.
Right. So the NICD highlighted the importance of being open-minded and listening to the arguments others make, but also stand firm without resorting to character attacks when rebutting others' claims. So you can still stand up for yourself, especially if you firmly, you have these facts that are firmly there. But they also express that it's important to, quote, acknowledge shared values, aspirations, and experience, and to call out points of agreement. So maybe that's, we need to say, oh, we agree on that. More than
what we can agree on.
Well, we don't, instead of pointing out all the negatives and the disagreement, we do agree on certain things.
And if you're not open to any other facts or side of the story,
I think you better go look
in the mirror.
Bridge.
Something. Yeah. You're not meant to live in society, I don't think.
So as I mentioned earlier and in previous podcasts, education is extremely important, both civics education and social education for young Americans as well as adults, if needed. Also, as mentioned earlier, to engage civilly requires significant patience, mental effort, and emotional labor, which can be exhausting and frustrating. But if you're tired of the arguing and tired of all of the negativity, I think you said it has to start somewhere.
Let's start today. I'm tired of it.
People need to take the effort and do these things.
Yes.
And for adults, it may take extra effort because they're not in a school setting where maybe they're using these skills a lot. However, if we want to see change and get back to less polarization, and we want to heal our democratic republic and return and maintain a healthy democracy as the framers had hoped, then we the people are going to have to take the lead in making the conscious effort to return to these characteristics of healthy civil discourse. So I will leave listeners with this question: can we find the better angels of our nature? And I'm going to add this quote from Professor Timothy Snyder: history does not repeat, but it does instruct. So look back at some of these different time periods. Don't feel like it's the end because we're maybe at this tipping point, but we can recover.
And appealing to our better angels doesn't mean that we just sit and look out the window for these angels to come in a flock. The better angels are in each of us.
Right.
They're in you, they're in me, they're in my neighbors, they're in the people we disagree with. And for those angels to come and do their work, we have to be open to dialogue and different opinions.
And I think generally most people are good people.
Yes, I do too. So Bobbi, what's next?
So our next episode, I think, is going to be about the First Amendment. And it might actually be the next couple of episodes because it's the First Amendment, because it includes a lot of freedoms. So we may not be able to get them all in our time period that we try to keep within. But we're going to look at least freedom of speech next episode. We'll see how far we can get. But First Amendment.
First Amendment coming up. Stay tuned. That's episode 21. And now we move on to the pop quiz. Ulery.
So in the last episode, I actually gave two questions. One was if you could name at least one of your U.S. senators from your state. If you're not in Indiana, I mean, I know a few of who a few are, but if you're in Indiana, if you answered Todd Young and Jim Banks, there you go.
You got it right.
If you live in a different state, just Google it. You can see if you knew or not. I mean, you should know that.
It's not a bad idea to know.
Right. And the question that mattered was, the House of Representatives has how many voting members? And the answer to that is 435.
And you had mentioned that's been that number for a while.
Right, since I think 1929 or something like that.
So Congress has 535 members.
Exactly. Now, this episode's question from the U.S. naturalization test is, we elect a U.S. representative to serve how many years? So what's their term of office? And I will give a hint, it's not the same as a senator.
Yeah.
But that's the end of the hints.
And we've also discussed it before.
We have.
Very important topics we've discussed in these last few episodes. Another very important topic coming up with the First Amendment, relevant to what we're seeing and hearing on a daily basis. So stay tuned as we engage in that. Bobbi, thank you so much. I know this was a work in progress as things and events have happened over the last couple of weeks. So thank you. It's a sensitive topic, and you did a great job going down the middle.
I had to make a lot of edits.
Well, you did a great job. Thank you. And before we go, it's time to induct our latest person into our Plain Civics Honor Roll. And Bobbi, you have someone that we're going to nominate. Who's today?
Right. This is another co-worker of mine who religiously listens to our podcast while she's doing her workouts. She told me, and her name is Leslie Gropner, and she lives in Lafayette. She always, when we're working, she always says, I listened to your podcast. I really liked it. So thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. And if you listen to our podcast and would like to possibly be inducted to our honor roll, which we hope you do, please send us a note on Facebook or send us a message on Facebook, or you can just rate our podcast on whatever platform on which you listen to this broadcast, and you will be eligible.
And I might add, even if you don't want to, rate it on there or whatever, just tell us. Our honor roll person the episode before has written on our Facebook page. Tell us in person or send us
we would love that.
Text or whatever. It doesn't have to be public.
It doesn't, and we love the fact of when we hear from you. So please get in touch with us. If you see us on the street, stop us, tell us. I love the fact that you work with people. I love that you're an evangelist for what we're doing, and that you work with some folks that appreciate what we're doing here today. That's good feedback, and it's good motivation for us, and I appreciate hearing it. So Bobbi, thank you again. That is it for this episode of Plain Civics, breaking down the basics. No politics, just facts. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.
This is Plain Civics. Join us for the journey as we break down the basics of how government works so you can make the government work for you.